always light the same candle when I call my mother. It's stupid, I know. The label says cardamom and coffee, but it smells more like burnt sugar and something faintly medicinal. I bought it 3 years ago during a clearance sale, and for whatever reason, it became a ritual. Something about the flicker made the conversations feel manageable, like I had a tether, something warm. My name is Claire Harrow. I'm 36. I've been a soldier, a daughter, and more often than I want to admit, something like a ghost. I didn't think a phone call could still get under my skin. But last Thursday, I called my mother to talk about her deed. The house had been in her name and mine for 2 years since I helped her pay off the remainder of the mortgage. She couldn't afford it alone, said she needed a little help for a few months. That was before the pandemic. The months became years. She wasn't warm when I called. She rarely is. I don't think she even asked how I was. Just launched into questions, legal ones, procedural ones. Do you have the papers? Did you get the email from Curtis? I'm not doing this twice, Claire. I said yes. I said I'd sign whatever needed signing. I asked if she was sure she wanted to take full ownership now. Her tone shifted, vaguely annoyed. Well, of course. I'm not dead yet. I don't need your name on everything like some safety net. It was like that. Always like that. Sharp edges disguised as independence. I've come to expect it like weather. We hung up, or I thought we had. I went to blow out the candle when I heard the faintest rustle on the other end. I paused. The call was still active. She hadn't hung up, and she was still talking. I shouldn't have listened. But I did. I sat back down and turned off the lamp, holding the phone to my ear like it might explode. She always has to make it about herself, my mother said, her voice echoing against what I imagined to be her hideous yellow kitchen. Just sign the damn papers and go play soldier again. Another voice joined in, my sister Elena. That part shocked me. I didn't know she was there. She thinks she's better than us, Elena said, laughing softly. Always the hero. You know what she told me? That she paid for the taxes last year. Like it was a gift. My mother laughed too. Not a full laugh. A dry, dismissive one. She's not worth anything. Never was. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The words didn't sting the way you'd expect. They numbed everything. Like a switch flipped, and I wasn't in my body anymore. The candle flickered once. Then it died. I stayed there for a long time, holding the phone against my cheek, the silence growing dense in the room. When the call finally ended on its own, I laid the phone on the table like it had done something terrible. I thought about calling back, demanding an explanation, asking if they knew I'd heard. But something stopped me. Not fear, not anger, just exhaustion, the kind of weariness that lives deep in your spine. I'd spent my whole life trying to be useful. To her, to Elena, to every teacher, superior officer, landlord, and stranger who looked like they needed something I could give. Quiet competence was my armor. But now I was sitting alone, staring at a dead candle and a phone that still felt hot in my hand. What was I supposed to do with that? I walked into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. The room was dark, except for the light spilling in from the hallway. My eyes looked small, my mouth a tight line. I touched the scar on my palm without realizing it. That old thing. A reminder from a place no one asked about anymore. She's not worth anything. I whispered it out loud, just to hear it in the room. It didn't sound like a truth. It sounded like a wound, still trying to be relevant. I thought I was over needing my mother to see me. I really did. But hearing those words flat and final did something I hadn't prepared for. It cracked something open. I didn't cry. I'm not the crying type. I just stood there in the half-light trying to feel my own weight in the room, trying to decide if I believed her. The candle sat on the kitchen table, wax solidifying into a useless pool. I didn't relight it. I didn't hang up. Not right away. There was something about the way she said it, casual, almost distracted, that held me in place. I just sat there, the phone warm in my hand, listening. My mother had always been careful about what she said out loud. She didn't drink, didn't slur, didn't ramble. She was precise. But not this time. Her words came easily, like they'd been sitting in her throat waiting for the right crack to slip through. "She thinks she's so noble," she said, "with all her stripes and service. She always needed to be admired. She doesn't even like people," Elena added. "I mean, I don't either, but at least I'm honest about it." They laughed. Together. I'd forgotten what their laughter sounded like, light conspiratorial. It used to include me when I was little, back before I stopped being something soft. I should have hung up. Should have stood up, walked away, done anything except sit there in the half-dark, listening to the two people who shared my blood talk about me like I was furniture they'd outgrown. "She never fit," my mother continued. "Even when she was little, always off somewhere, staring out windows, getting quiet when people were over. It was like having a guest who never left." "She'd be better off on a base somewhere," Elena muttered. "Honestly, I think she likes war. It gives her a reason to avoid us." Another pause. Then my mother's voice dropped just a little. "She's not worth anything. Never was." I don't know how long the silence stretched after that. They changed the subject eventually. Started talking about a leaky pipe under the sink. A coupon for window installation. The mundane crept in, brushing over what they'd just said like a tide sweeping away something jagged. I pressed the red button and ended the call. The room felt colder. My thumb hurt. I looked down and realized I'd been gripping the phone so hard the edge had broken the skin just above the knuckle. A thin smear of blood curved around the base of my nail. I wiped it on my jeans without thinking. I didn't move for a long time. Just sat there listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of tires on wet pavement outside. It had started raining at some point. Soft, misty rain that made the windows look like they were sweating. The candle was still out, wax hardened at an angle. A blackened wick curled like a hook. I thought about calling Elena, about asking her to repeat what she'd said while looking me in the face. But I already knew how that would go. She'd twist it, laugh it off, say I was being sensitive, tell me I misinterpreted the tone. That's what she always did. She could turn guilt into fog just thick enough to make you question what you'd heard. And my mother. She'd deny it flatly. Or worse, she'd acknowledge it without flinching. "Well, Claire, if you're going to eavesdrop, be prepared to hear things you don't like." I stood up and walked to the sink, ran cold water over my hand, watched the pink swirl drain away. The pain wasn't sharp. It was more of a throb. Dull, steady. Like something was reminding me that I still had a body, even if I didn't feel like I was fully in it. There's a particular kind of ache that comes not from loss, but from confirmation. When something you always suspected gets spoken out loud. When the monster finally steps into the light and you realize you were right to flinch in the dark. I'd spent years trying to reframe the way she loved me. Told myself she was proud in her own way, that she showed it through action, not words. That the lack of softness was just her generation, her background, her own buried traumas. I built a scaffolding of excuses around her so tall I started to believe in the architecture of it. But one sentence crumbled all of it. She's not worth anything. Not angry, not cruel. Just decided. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room. It's a quiet space, muted green walls, heavy curtains, books stacked on the nightstand in uneven towers. a pair of boots by the door, the kind of room that holds its breath. I picked up the envelope from the table, the deed transfer. My name typed neatly next to hers in all caps. I'd added it 2 years ago because I thought it meant something. Because she needed help. Because I still wanted to be the kind of daughter who showed up. But now it just felt like proof I'd let her occupy a piece of me for far too long. I reached for a pen, drew a line through my name with slow, deliberate pressure. It wasn't legal, not yet, but it was a beginning. I didn't cry. I haven't cried in years. It's not a source of pride, just fact. Tears never got me anything growing up. They made her cold, and they made Elena cruel. So I learned to let grief settle in quieter places behind the jaw, in the space between shoulders, in the breath I hold just a second too long. Outside, the rain picked up. Not loud, just steady. I relit the candle. It took 3 tries. The flame wavered like it was making a decision. Then it held. I watched it burn for a while. The scent was weaker now, almost gone. Just a faint echo of sugar and spice. It didn't comfort me this time, but it was something. A mark in the room. A reminder that even small flames can resist the dark for a little while. The lock clicked open with a softness that caught me off guard. I expected resistance. That olive green box hadn't been touched in years. It sat on the top shelf of my hall closet like a sealed-up piece of someone I used to be. Every apartment I moved to it came with me always at the back, always last to unpack. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, that everything inside had already been processed and put away. But that wasn't true. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the box in front of me, my hand resting on the lid like it might flinch. The night after the call, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying her voice over and over again. Not the words, just the tone. That clean, detached disapproval. Like I'd been filed under regret a long time ago. I got up around 3 a.m., walked barefoot to the hallway closet, and pulled the box down with both hands. It was heavier than I remembered. The lid opened with a slow groan. On top, my bronze star. Polished once, maybe twice. The ribbon underneath still held the shape of the box's edge. Next to it, 4 service ribbons, one faded, one stained with something I didn't remember spilling. Below that, 6 small field journals wrapped in an old rubber band that had turned brittle and cracked when I touched it. I pulled them out one by one. They smelled like dust and diesel. Each one full of cramped handwriting entries from deployment, scribbled notes from people I haven't seen in over a decade. There were sand grains trapped in the creases. I brushed them off my fingers, but they clung for a while. And then I saw the envelope. It was wedged under the journals exactly where I'd left it. A plain white envelope sealed, slightly bent at the corner. Her name was written in my cleanest print. Marlene Evelyn. No mom, no mother, just the name on her driver's license. I remember writing that letter late one night in Kandahar. We'd just returned from a foot patrol that went sideways. No one died, but it rattled us. The kind of night where silence felt like a dare. I sat on my cot and wrote her everything. Not the military stuff, not the politics, just the truth. What it felt like to be far away, to want to come home and not know where that even was. I folded the pages neatly, wrote her name in block letters, paid extra to mail it with tracking. When I got home months later, it was sitting on the corner of her kitchen table. Unopened. She never mentioned it. Never asked what I'd written. I told myself maybe she forgot. Maybe she didn't understand what it was. But deep down, I knew. She saw my name on the envelope and chose not to open it. I held it now with both hands, pressed it to my face. The paper was cool, slightly damp from the room's humidity. I could still smell the ink faintly. It felt like holding a part of myself I didn't know how to claim anymore. A letter written by a daughter who still believed there was something worth giving. I could hear her voice in my head from that call. She's not worth anything. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me did. A small shift like furniture settling in a house you thought was empty. I wanted to open the letter, to read what I had written so long ago. But I didn't. Somehow I knew that breaking the seal would undo me in a way I couldn't recover from, not because of what was inside, but because of what it meant that she never cared to read it. I put it down gently on the floor beside me. People think betrayal is a sharp thing, but this wasn't sharp. It was slow, like erosion, like realizing the water had been pulling at the shore for years and you never noticed until your feet found air instead of ground. I laid everything out in front of me, medals, journals, letter, and sat there in the dark. I remembered one time when I was 9. I scraped my knee falling off my bike. I came inside crying dirt in the wound, blood streaking down my leg. My mother didn't rush, didn't flinch. She got a wet cloth and told me without looking up, pain is useful. It teaches you not to be careless. She bandaged it tightly, too tightly. I remember how it pinched my skin. I didn't say anything. I wanted her to think I could handle it. That was the trade. Be tough, and you might get a moment of care. Just don't need too much of it. Now, all these years later, I was still sitting on the floor trying to decipher what counted as care in her world. I picked up one of the journals and flipped through the pages. On the inside cover, I'd written in pencil, "If found, don't return." Just read. That version of me, that girl in a uniform in the middle of a desert, was already bracing for silence. The candle in the kitchen had gone out again. I hadn't noticed. The room felt different in the dark. Not hollow exactly. Just paused. I took the envelope and slid it back into the box. Locked it again. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I was starting to understand that forgetting was never the goal. The goal was to see things clearly and still choose to move forward. I put the box back on the shelf. No higher or lower than before, just exactly where it belonged. My sister once told me that silence was how we said "I love you" in our house. She meant it as a joke, said it with that sly grin she always used to soften the weight of truth. But she wasn't wrong. We didn't hug. We didn't touch. We didn't ask each other how we felt. We folded towels with sharp corners, said "thank you" when handed a plate, and thought of vulnerability like a leak in the ceiling, something to patch quickly before it spread. When I was a kid, I used to sit under the dining table during my parents' arguments. That table was solid oak, heavy as a confession, and I'd trace the underside with my fingertips while they fought in the kitchen. My mother's voice was always clipped, controlled. My father's was quieter, but more jagged. They never screamed. That would have been too obvious, too loud for the image they worked so hard to project. Once, when I was around 10, I heard her say to him, "You coddle her. She's going to be weak." His answer came slowly, like it hurt to say, "She's a child, Marlene, not a soldier." That night he slept on the couch. He left a year later on my 11th birthday. There wasn't a scene. Just a cold morning, a packed duffel bag, and the sound of a screen door closing more gently than it needed to. He didn't hug me goodbye. He didn't take anything but clothes and a toolbox. My mother said nothing. She just sat at the kitchen table, peeling an orange, each strip of rind, falling in perfect coils. She never blamed herself. She blamed me. "He loved you more than he loved me," she said once, months later. That's why he left. It was said without heat, like stating the temperature outside. But it stuck in me like gravel. From that point on, she stopped saying my name the same way. It became clipped, functional, like an order or a warning. I learned to be quiet. I was good at it. In school, I sat in the back, did my work, didn't raise my hand unless I knew the answer was bulletproof. Teachers liked me because I didn't cause problems. Other kids didn't notice me unless they needed a partner. I liked being invisible. It felt like armor. But the quiet had rules. You couldn't be too quiet. That made people uncomfortable. You had to smile sometimes, nod at the right moment, show just enough warmth to keep from being labeled difficult. My mother taught me that without ever saying a word. When I told her I'd enlisted, she didn't ask why, didn't blink. Just sipped her coffee and said, "That tracks." I didn't know if it was an insult or approval. I still don't. The military made sense to me. Orders were clear. Expectations came in neat lines. You didn't have to guess what someone meant when they told you to move, run, aim, breathe. I liked that. I liked the boundaries, the absence of emotional guesswork. And when I came back, metal scars, and all my mother treated me like I'd gone to grad school and come back with an overpriced degree in self-righteousness. "Don't make everything about what you've been through," she said once when I'd mentioned the difficulty of sleeping through fireworks. "Other people have struggles too." I nodded. Didn't argue. That was the rule. Even with Elena. Maybe especially with Elena. She learned the same code I did, but she applied it differently. Where I became sharp-edged and careful, she became charming and slippery. She learned how to redirect the room, how to stay on everyone's good side without staying long enough to be held accountable. She'd say things like, "Don't be so serious, Claire," and smile like she hadn't just cut something out of me. When she and Mom laughed on that phone call after I hung up after I bled, I realized I'd always been the one outside the window watching them. I used to think that if I just worked harder, did more, showed up better, I could earn a seat at that table again. But I was never really at the table. I was underneath it, tracing the edges, listening to the shape of things I couldn't fix. That's the part that hurt the most. Not the words themselves, but how normal it sounded when they said them. "She's not worth anything," like they were finally saying what they'd always believed. And I was finally hearing it without distortion. I wish I could say I felt anger. That would have been cleaner, simpler. But what I felt was recognition. Like I'd been solving an equation for years, and someone had just handed me the answer key. There it was. Plain. I had spent decades hoping for warmth from people who preferred climate control. Back in the hallway, I stood in front of the closet and looked at the box again. I didn't touch it, just stared at it long enough for my feet to go numb on the hardwood. That house, her house, had never felt like mine. Even with my name on the deed. Even with all the paperwork and payments and late-night phone calls I'd made on her behalf. It was just another room I was meant to leave eventually. The difference now was that I wasn't going to apologize on my way out. He looked like someone's nervous uncle. That was my first impression. Gray tie, too tight. Hair thinned out but combed with care. He stood when I walked in, held out his hand like he didn't know if I'd shake it or break it. I didn't either. Just nodded and sat down in the stiff leather chair across from his desk. "Ms. Harrow," he said, reading from a file like it might shield him. "Thanks for coming in." I didn't respond right away. The room smelled like artificial pine, the kind that comes from those triangular car fresheners. Too clean. Like it was hiding something. A scent meant to make you forget about mold. He cleared his throat. "I, spoke with your mother. She said you'd be handling the paperwork in person." I opened my folder, slid the manila envelope across the desk to him. "I want my name off the deed." His eyebrows twitched, not quite raised, just slightly unsettled. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. It's just unusual. he said, tapping the envelope. You helped secure the loan. Co-signed. If the house were to be, I don't want it. He glanced at his monitor, then back at me. You understand that this relinquishes any legal claim to the property? I nodded once. That's the point. He looked like he wanted to ask why. They always do. People who sit behind desks with certificates on the wall. People who think disconnection is a puzzle that can be solved with a few clarifying questions. But I wasn't here to explain myself. He sat back, slowly opened the envelope. His hands were smooth, well-lotioned. He wore a wedding ring. Gold, no scratches. That's always the kind of detail I notice first rings watches the way people manage their presents. It's instinct left over from years of assessing threats by the smallest tells. He began scanning the documents, flipping through with soft rustles. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. A white panel tile was slightly cracked. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. Somewhere outside the office, a fax machine whined into life and spat something out. He paused at the last page. Do you want to add a statement? Sometimes people include a note with the removal. A reason, just for the file. I shook my head. No need. Let the absent speak. He looked surprised, but he didn't press. I watched him reach for a stamp mark the bottom corner with practiced precision. Then he folded the pages back into their envelope and slid it into a drawer. That was it. Years of resentment and invisible effort reduced to a whisper of ink and a soundless surrender. She'll need to come in and sign, of course, he said. We'll schedule something this week. She'll come. She wants it. He nodded, then softer, like he didn't mean to say it out loud. Families are complicated. I didn't smile. I didn't say anything. That word, complicated, it's what people use when they don't want to say fractured, or empty, or done. I stood up. The chair creaked as it released me. I could feel his eyes on me as I adjusted my coat, pulled my gloves from my pocket. You served right, he asked suddenly. I turned halfway toward him. What gave it away? He smiled nervously. Your boots, they're regulation. I nodded once, still fit. He hesitated. Thank you for your service. That phrase used to mean something to me. Now it feels like a formality, like asking someone how they are and expecting them to lie. Still, I answered the same way I always do. You're welcome. Outside, the air smelled like snow. No flakes yet, but the cold had that texture. Thick, waiting. The kind of sky that makes you walk faster without realizing it. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the ignition. The envelope was gone, filed tucked into some cabinet beside hundreds of others. But the release I'd expected didn't come. It's strange how quiet freedom is. There's no fanfare, no clean break, just a shift, a loosening. I looked in the rear-view mirror and saw myself looking back, jaw set, mouth neutral, no triumph, no regret, only space. I remember a time maybe 5 years ago when I tried to surprise my mother for her birthday. I took a weekend off, flew home, showed up with a small cake and a gift, an antique brooch I'd found in a stall in Berlin wrapped in a silk handkerchief. She opened the door and said, You should have called. I told her I wanted it to be a surprise. She said, I don't like surprises. She opened the gift later, wore the brooch once, then I never saw it again. That memory came back as I sat in the car watching a couple walk by arms, linked laughing over something small. Their coats brushed together. His scarf trailed in the wind. I could have cried maybe if I let myself, but it didn't come. Instead, I thought about the window behind my mother's kitchen sink. How the glass has been cracked for years. She never fixed it. Just stuck a magnet on it, some dumb souvenir from a trip she never took, and said, It's fine. That's what she always says. But I'm not fine. And I don't need the house, or the title, or the illusion. I put the car in gear and drove away. No music, just tires on pavement and the clean, sharp rhythm of a decision already made. The walls were still that tired, sun-stained yellow. Not cheerful, not soft, just old. The kind of color that used to mean warmth, but stayed long past the people who gave it meaning. I hadn't been in her kitchen in over a year. I think I'd hoped stupidly that something would have changed. She was pouring coffee when I came in. The smell was familiar, but the moment wasn't. She looked up startled for half a second before her expression flattened. "Claire," she said, neutral as ever, like she was acknowledging the mailman. I didn't sit down, didn't take off my coat. I pulled the envelope from my bag and set it on the counter between us. She didn't touch it right away. "What's this?" she asked, though she already knew. "Final notice. You just need to sign it at the office. My name's off the deed." She frowned slightly, not confusion, more annoyance. Why I didn't answer. She stared at me, waiting like she expected me to crack open and spill out a list of justifications. But I'd already learned that explanations weren't bridges with her. They were invitations for her to argue. She took a sip of coffee. "You're making a mistake." I looked past her to the window behind the sink. The same magnet was still there, a cheap plastic dolphin with the words San Diego faded down the side. She's never been to San Diego. I remember asking her once where it came from. She said it came in a pack. I liked the color. The glass behind the magnet was cracked, same as always, a fracture running diagonally from the bottom corner like a scar that never healed. "No," I said. "I'm finally telling the truth." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. No rebuttal, no guilt, just silence. I remembered being 14, standing in that same kitchen, with wet socks after a rainstorm. I'd walked home alone from school, half a mile in freezing drizzle, and when I came in, shivering, shoes soaked, she looked me up and down and said, "You should have worn better shoes." Then she turned back to the stove, like I was just a noise she'd grown used to ignoring. It wasn't cruelty. That's what made it harder to name. It was the absence of curiosity, the refusal to care deeply enough to ask. Now she stood across from me with that same distant air. "Did Elena tell you I heard the call?" I asked. She looked surprised for a fraction of a second. "What call?" I held her gaze. "You didn't hang up, Mom. After our last talk, I heard everything you said." There it was, the flicker, just behind her eyes. A calculation. "I was venting," she said. "You know how people talk? Don't take everything so personally." There it was again, that word, personally, like it was a weakness to bleed from a knife meant for you. "You said I was never worth anything." She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just turned to rinse her mug. The water ran harder than it needed to, like she wanted the faucet to answer for her. "I did a lot for this family," I said. "You may not have seen it, but I did." She wiped her hands on a towel. "We all do things. That doesn't make us saints." "I'm not trying to be a saint." "Well, you sure act like the only one with any burdens around here." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly her, so polished in its dismissal. I looked around the room. Same chipped ceramic bowl on the table. Same wall clock with the missing minute hand. Same stack of unopened mail by the back door. It was like walking into a photo I'd stepped out of years ago. "This place doesn't change," I said quietly. "You say that like it's a bad thing." I didn't respond. She stepped forward, reached for the envelope again, glanced at it without opening it. "So, you're just walking away." I met her eyes. I'm finally walking right. For a moment, I thought she might say something else. Something real. But she didn't. She tucked the envelope under a stack of newspapers and turned back toward the sink. I stood there waiting, unsure if I needed more from her. A word, a sentence, anything to make the air between us mean something. But she just started wiping the counter, methodical, focused on crumbs that weren't there. I walked to the door. As I reached for the knob, she said, "You think this makes you strong, but it just makes you cold." I stopped, my hand resting on the metal. "No," I said without turning around. "You made me cold. This makes me free." I stepped outside and closed the door softly behind me. The sky was heavy with gray. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and fell quiet. I got in my car and just sat there, hands on the wheel, watching her front window. The curtain didn't move. She wouldn't chase me. She never did. And I wouldn't wait. She didn't know I'd be there. That much was clear. Elena walked into the house like she owned it keys, jingling in one hand, her purse sliding off her shoulder, sunglasses still perched on top of her head, even though it was overcast outside. She stopped cold when she saw me standing near the window coat, still on mug in my hand. "Oh," she said, like she'd walked into the wrong room of a party. Not shocked, just mildly inconvenienced. "Elena," I said. She closed the door behind her with a little too much care. "Didn't know you were stopping by. Guess we both like surprises?" She set her bag on the counter, then glanced toward the hallway. "Where's Mom?" "Went upstairs. Needed a nap, apparently." She gave a small nod, like that explained everything. Then she pulled a La Croix from the fridge and leaned against the sink. Her eyes flicked to the envelope still sitting under a pile of newspapers, and then quickly back to me. "Been a while," she said after a sip. "You look tired." "I am." She laughed lightly. "Same." I set the mug down, watching her. Elena had always been hard to read if you didn't grow up with her. But I knew the signs, the fake ease, the calculated casualness. "You were on the call," I said. She didn't pretend not to know which one. "Claire." She sighed like I'd just pulled out a piece of old furniture she didn't want to move again. "That was Mom venting. You know how she gets?" You laughed. She flinched at that, a subtle shift in posture, almost imperceptible. Then she rolled her eyes. "God, are you really doing this?" "What exactly do you think I heard?" I asked. She crossed her arms. "You always take things so personally. Everything's a wound with you. Is that what I am to you?" "A wound, honestly." She laughed again, but it was flatter this time. "You've always made things heavier than they needed to be." I stared at her, the silence stretching between us. I could still remember us as kids playing in the yard, making up spy games, digging holes in the garden like we were searching for treasure. Back then, she used to follow me everywhere. She wanted to be me. I guess that stopped when I stopped being easy to love. "Did you ever even read the letter I sent?" I asked. She blinked. "What letter?" "Never mind." She sighed and stepped closer. "Look, Mom says a lot of stuff. So do you. I'm not picking sides. You already did. That got her." For a moment, the slick veneer cracked. "Just slightly. She needed help," she said, quieter now. "You weren't around. I was deployed. She was still alone." "So were you. You could have called me." She looked away toward the cracked kitchen window. "You always made it seem like we were disappointing you," she said. "Like being near you meant we had to pass some test." I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure she was wrong. "I'm not asking you to explain her," I said finally. "I'm telling you, I'm done pretending she didn't mean it." She set the can down on the counter with a soft click. "You know she doesn't hate you." I didn't respond. She trailed off like the word she needed had wandered out of reach. "She just never loved me the way I wanted her to," I finished for her. We stood there in the stillness of the kitchen, the yellow walls humming with memories neither of us could name aloud. "You're not better than us," she said not unkindly. "I never said I was." "You act like you are." "No," I said. "I act like I survived something you still refuse to name." That landed harder than I meant it to, but I didn't take it back. She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded almost imperceptibly, like some part of her understood, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. "I'm staying here for a while," she said. "Just so you know." I figured. "Don't hate her forever," she added softer now. "I don't hate her," I said. I just stopped hoping she'd change. That was the truth. She picked up her bag again and walked toward the hallway, her back straight, steps light. She didn't say goodbye. I stood there a little longer, looking at the envelope under the newspaper pile. It didn't feel heavy anymore. Just irrelevant. I remembered something from when we were teenagers, a night when our mother left us home alone and the power went out during a storm. I'd lit a candle, and Elena had sat beside me in the hallway, scared. I told her a story about two sisters living in a cave protecting each other from wolves. She fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. Now she couldn't even meet my eyes when I asked for truth. I didn't blame her. Not exactly. We were all shaped by the same hands. But I wasn't going to be shaped anymore. I picked up my coat and stepped outside. The sky had cleared. Late afternoon sun spilled across the street, soft and amber. I walked to the car, slowly letting the silence follow me. The candle hissed when I lit it. It had burned down enough that the wick was buried under wax, so the flame danced unevenly low, stubborn, flickering like it didn't trust the air. I held the envelope in both hands. The same one from the box. Still sealed. Still clean despite the years it had been moved from one apartment to the next like a piece of fragile furniture. It was heavier than it looked, the kind of weight that didn't come from paper. I ran my thumb across the crease. Her name still stared back at me in my neat block handwriting, Marlene Evelyn, like a stranger I once knew well. I tried to imagine what I'd written inside. Tried to remember the way my hand moved as I wrote it, the rhythm of it, the pressure. I'd filled 5 pages. No edits, no drafts. Just one long letter, scribbled during a windstorm in Kandahar, the kind that kicks sand into your teeth and makes the night feel colder than it should. I remember writing about silence, about the strange kind of loneliness that fills your ears when everything else finally stops. I told her about a stray dog that kept showing up near the barracks. I'd named it Tennyson. I never told anyone that. I don't think I ever wrote a letter like that to anyone else. She never opened it, not even out of obligation. I thought about that call again. The click I hadn't noticed at first. Her voice floating into my ear like a secret someone forgot to bury. She's not worth anything. The words hadn't grown dull with time. If anything, they'd sharpened. Not because they were cruel, but because of how ordinary they sounded coming from her mouth, like they'd lived there. I stood in front of the sink, turned on the exhaust fan. Opened the small kitchen window, just a crack. The autumn air pressed against it, cool and watchful. I lit a match. The envelope caught slow at first. Just a tiny brown kiss along the edge. Then it curled in on itself, catching flame like it had been waiting for this. The pages burned faster. I could see glimpses of my own handwriting through the flame, a slant of blue ink, the tail of a sentence I couldn't read in time. The paper warped, buckled, turned black at the corners. I held it with tongs until it was just ash and memory. The embers hissed as they fell into the basin of the sink. Some stuck to the porcelain, thin and gray and clinging. I didn't feel lighter, but I felt clearer, like the air had shifted around me, like I could finally look at the shape of things without flinching. I watched the smoke curl out the window, a thin, pale thread that disappeared before it could reach anything. I imagined her sitting at that kitchen table, peeling an orange, laughing with Elena, talking about me like I was a story they'd both grown tired of. Let them. Let them have the version of me that doesn't exist anymore. I'd carried that letter in my mind for so long, I'd forgotten it was just paper. A part of me wanted to take a photo of the ashes, to prove something, but I didn't. There was nothing to prove. Not anymore. I sat at the table candle between my hands and stared into the flame. It wasn't much of a light, but it was mine. People talk about closure like it's a clean door shutting. But this felt more like clearing a table, brushing off dust, making room. I opened my laptop, clicked through files until I found the scanned copy of the deed transfer. My name printed cleanly beside hers. I hovered over it for a moment. Then I highlighted my name and pressed delete. Gone. I didn't save the file. I didn't need to. The real papers were already filed. The law would catch up with the truth in a few days. I closed the screen and sat in the stillness. There was no applause, no thunder, just the faint scent of burnt paper and wax, and the hollow click of silence making itself at home. I touched the scar on my palm. It had faded over time. The skin was uneven there, thicker, a little numb, but I liked it. It reminded me of a version of myself who had bled and survived and never once waited for applause. The clock ticked somewhere behind me. I hadn't noticed it before. It was quiet, almost respectful. A sound that didn't demand anything. I didn't cry, not because I couldn't, but because there was nothing left to grieve in that moment. There was only what came next, and I didn't know what that was yet. But I knew it would belong to me. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I packed a bag with one change of clothes, a book I knew I wouldn't read, and the photo, the one of me standing straight-backed in uniform, the sun slanting across my face like a kind of permission. I tucked it into a plain envelope. No note, just the photo. Something to leave behind. It was 6 hours from where I lived to the small town in Vermont where he'd settled. The roads curled through old forests, yellow leaves plastered to the pavement like wet pages. I drove without music. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had shape now, like a room I was learning to walk through without bumping into the past. He didn't know I was coming. I hadn't seen him since I was 15. One Christmas visit, 2 days of small talk and awkward silences. He gave me a fleece scarf I never wore. I gave him a coffee mug with a pine tree on it. We both pretended it meant something. Since then, just postcards, a few calls, never more than 10 minutes. Still, I knew where he worked. He ran a woodworking class at a community center on the edge of town, Tuesday afternoons. I got there early and parked across the street. The building was squat and red brick with ivy strangling one side and a rusted flagpole leaning at a tired angle. I waited. He came out around 4:30, holding a bundle of scrap wood and laughing with a teenage boy who looked about 16. Tall, lanky, unsure of his hands. My father helped him load the wood into the back of a dusty pickup, then clapped him on the shoulder. The boy smiled, nodded, then drove away. My father stood there a moment, squinting up at the sky, like he was trying to read something in the clouds. He looked older than I expected, thinner. His hair had gone silver at the temples, and his hands moved with the careful deliberation of someone who knew what it meant to make mistakes slowly. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to ask the questions I already knew he couldn't answer. I just wanted to see, to confirm for myself that he was real, that he hadn't vanished completely into whatever life he'd chosen after he left us. He walked to his own car, a battered Subaru with one blue door, and opened the driver's side. I got out then, walked across the street with the envelope in my hand, boots crunching on gravel. He didn't see me. I slipped the envelope under his windshield wiper and walked back to my car without looking back. Inside, I sat behind the wheel, watching the world move in slow motion. He hadn't noticed yet. He was still adjusting the seatbelt, flipping through a set of keys. I waited. Then he saw it. He paused, reached out, pulled the envelope free and stared at it, turning it over, like he expected it to explain itself. Then he opened it. He took out the photo. I watched him. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. His face didn't change at all. He just held the picture in his lap for a long moment. Then he looked around the street, scanning the sidewalks, like maybe whoever left it was still nearby. But by then, I'd already started the engine. I turned the corner slowly, no rush, no urgency, just movement. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. What I felt was harder to name. Something like release, but more grounded. Like placing a heavy stone down after years of carrying it under your ribs. I'd always wondered who he was when he wasn't a shadow at the edge of a house filled with resentment. Now I knew. He was a man who built things out of wood and taught other people how to do the same. A man who looked up at clouds and didn't flinch. That was enough. On the drive home, I thought about the time he taught me how to sand a plank of cedar. I was 8. He showed me how to go with the grain. You fight the grain, he said, and the wood fights back. Go with it, and you make something that lasts. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. The people I came from, they fought the grain, and maybe I did too for a while, trying to smooth things that were never meant to be polished. But not anymore. I got home after dark. The hallway light buzzed overhead as I kicked off my boots. I went to the closet and pulled out the olive green box, not to open it, but to place something new inside. The photo. Not the original. I'd made a copy before I left. I slipped it inside, closed the lid, and set it back on the shelf. This time, it felt less like storage and more like curation. Like a museum of truths I no longer needed to wear every day. My father has a copy now. He can decide what to do with it. I already know what I'll do with mine. I forget it's there most days. The scar's just part of my hand, now a pale arc stretching from the center of my palm toward the base of my thumb. It's not ugly. It doesn't catch the eye unless the light hits it just right. But I always notice it when I hold something warm, a mug, a steering wheel that's soaked in afternoon sun, the handle of a skillet I've left on the stove too long. It came from a blast outside Al-Qut. Routine patrol. Nothing major until it was. An IED buried shallow beneath the gravel. We'd been lucky no one died, just shrapnel and confusion. My hand caught a piece of the roadside. I remember the medic wrapping it. His name was Travis. He had a toothpick in his mouth and hands that didn't shake. He looked down at the blood pooling in my glove and said, "This'll tell the truth when your mouth can't." I didn't understand that then. Now I do. It was late when I saw it again. I was washing dishes, the candle long burned out my mind, half numb from the kind of fatigue that doesn't come from movement, but from thinking too long in circles. The water ran too hot. I dropped a glass, and as I bent to clean it, my fingers flexed, and the scar stretched like a memory. I stood there elbow deep in soap and heat, and stared at my palm. It's strange how the body keeps records the mind tries to delete. That scar has outlasted friendships, lovers, duty stations. It survived better than my sense of home. When I showed it to my mother, months after returning from deployment, she barely looked at it. We were standing in that same yellow kitchen. I said, "Got caught in a blast." She nodded and said, "Well, be careful next time." That was it. I wore gloves more often after that, not to hide the scar, but to keep it from reminding me. People like to ask if combat changes you, but they rarely ask what happens when you come back to a place that refuses to see you differently, that pretends you never left, that measures you by who you were before you ever picked up a weapon or buried a friend. That's the part that carves deeper than shrapnel. I dried my hands and went to sit at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, clean, the kind of stillness I used to hate and now find comforting. I poured myself a glass of water and set it down next to the scanned deed transfer. My name was gone, legally and finally. The state had processed the documents that morning. I didn't smile, just nodded to myself like I was signing off on something I'd known for years. I thought about that girl, 21 in desert camo, writing letters home she knew would never be read. I wondered what she would have said if she saw me now. Maybe nothing. Maybe just handed me a cloth and helped wipe down the counter in silence. The scar pulled again as I turned the glass. Not pain, just a tug, a reminder that I've already been torn open once and healed. I keep thinking healing will come in a single moment, like a light switching on. But it's slower than that. It comes in flashes. In the refusal to answer a call, in the strength it takes not to send another letter. In the silence I let stand when someone expects me to fill it. It's in that scar. It's in the way I don't explain myself anymore. Once when I was 12, I burned my hand on the stove. My mother said pain is feedback. Pay attention. I carried that lesson into war zones, relationships, and now into the quiet aftermath. But there's another kind of feedback she never taught me, the kind that doesn't arrive as pain, but as absence, as the space left when you stop carrying people who never asked to be carried. My hand doesn't ache when it rains. It doesn't cramp. But when I press my thumb into the curve of the scar, I can feel the faintest difference in texture, like a fingerprint made by fire. A map to the version of me that made it back without fanfare. No one talks about the aftermath of choosing yourself, about how lonely it can feel at first, not because you're alone, but because the noise that used to occupy every room has gone. And in its place, just breath, just the sound of your own body reclaiming space. I looked down at my hand still resting on the table. That line in the skin isn't ugly, it's honest. It was wedged between a box of winter boots and a plastic bin full of college notebooks I hadn't looked at in a decade. I found it while digging through my storage locker, hunting for something else entirely, an old coat maybe, or a spare set of dishes I thought I'd lent to a friend. Instead, I found the tape recorder. Black plastic scratched on the bottom, still heavy in the way old tech is. I used to carry it everywhere in high school. Journalism club, interviews for a zine no one read, notes I didn't want to forget. I hadn't seen it in years. I didn't expect it to work. But it did. I took it back to my apartment and popped in one of the tapes still inside. No label. I pressed play. The click of the buttons was sharp and sudden. Then static, a hiss. And then, my mother's voice. I need milk, the good kind, not that fat-free stuff, and lemons. If they're soft, don't get them. Her voice filled the room like it always had, matter-of-fact, flat edge too loud for the space it took up. Then mine. 16, maybe. My voice higher, but already careful. Do you love me? A long pause. I remember now I recorded it as part of a piece we were doing for the school paper. Something about family communication. I told her I needed audio for class. Another beat of silence on the tape. Then her sigh. You don't need that. You'll be fine. The recording ended with a faint clunk. I sat on the floor for a long time after that. Tape still rolling, nothing but dead air hissing out. My hands rested on my knees, my head tilted toward the sound like I was waiting for it to finish the sentence. That's what silence is sometimes. Not absence, but a sentence that never finds its end. I pressed stop, ejected the tape, slipped it into a drawer, unsure if I'd ever listen to it again. What hit me wasn't the coldness of her voice, it was the familiarity. I knew that tone. I'd shaped myself around it. I used to think strength meant not needing to hear "I love you," that proving you were worthy without being told was more noble, braver. But what it really was lonely, not weak, not broken, just lonely in a way that never got named. I stood up and looked around the apartment. Everything was quiet. The candle on the table had burned low, a puddle of wax seeping out onto the coaster. The light outside had turned the buildings gold, softening the hard edges of the city for just a moment. I touched the scar on my palm more out of habit than pain. The skin there no longer surprised me. It was part of the story, part of the voice. The tape recorder sat on the table, its red button staring up at me, waiting, asking nothing. I thought about pressing record, saying something into it. Maybe this: my name is Claire Harrow. I've spent 36 years learning how to survive silence. It doesn't scare me anymore. Not because I filled it, but because I stopped needing it to answer back. I didn't press it. I didn't need to. The silence could stand on its own now. There are moments I still wish she had said it. That 3-word shape of care. Not because it would have changed what came after, but because part of me wanted to know what it might have sounded like in her voice. But she didn't say it. And I'm still here. There's a quiet kind of clarity in that. A woman once told me in a desert full of dust and diesel that love isn't always loud. That sometimes it's the way someone watches your backpacks. Your rations sharpens your blade without asking. I believed her for a long time. But I've come to believe something else too. Love doesn't hide. Not forever. It might falter, might fumble, might fail. But if it's real, it doesn't vanish when the words get hard. And if it never showed up, then maybe it was never there to begin with. I turned off the tape recorder and slid it into the drawer beside the ash from the burned letter. Different kinds of silence pressed together. I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel peace. Just the honest weight of memory settling where it belonged. The clerk wore bright coral nail polish and didn't look old enough to remember CDs. She smiled as I approached the counter, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear with the ease of someone who files paperwork for people in crisis 5 times a day. Divorce, probate, quiet exits, property title changes, she asked, already typing something into her screen. I nodded. Final release. I'm removing myself from the deed. She handed me a pen and pointed to the line. My name, Claire Harrow, typed in neat caps. There was still a quiet pressure behind my eyes, but I wasn't sure if it was from the building's fluorescent lights or something older. Once you sign, that's it, she said, voice soft, almost kind. No legal claim to the estate. Full ownership reverts to the other party. I didn't ask if she saw this often grown daughters unhooking themselves from mothers who don't notice they're burning. I signed. My hand didn't shake. The pen moved steadily as if it already knew what the rest of me had taken years to realize. Sometimes you leave, not because the place is collapsing, but because it's already collapsed, and no one noticed you were standing under the ceiling. She stamped the form with a quick, decisive click. That's it, she said, handing me the receipt. You're all set. I took the paper and stepped outside into the cold. The air hit my face like clarity. Brisk. Honest. No perfume, no masks. The parking lot was nearly empty. Just a few scattered cars, bare trees, waving their brittle arms at the pale sky. I slid into the driver's seat and didn't start the car. Just sat there, hands on the wheel, the signed release still warm in my coat pocket. No tears came. That surprised me. There's a kind of grief that cries for witnesses, and then there's this kind. The kind that settles quiet and low in your chest, like a door that closed a long time ago, but still creaks when you walk past it. I looked out at the pale afternoon light. The sky had that washed-out winter blue so soft, it made the world feel like it was made of tissue paper. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the receipt. One sheet, one clean line between me and her. No more co-ownership. No more ties that could be used as leverage. I wasn't hers anymore, not in any legal sense, not in any false guilt-tethered version of belonging. I didn't feel free, but I felt done. That word has a shape you can stand in. Done. Not as in finished. Done as in I'm not going back. I thought about calling Elena. Thought about texting something sharp and final. It's official. You can keep her. Thanks for the call, by the way. But I didn't. Not because I didn't want to, but because I realized I didn't need her to know anything. Some things don't require an audience. I watched my breath fog the inside of the windshield, then fade. I reached over and opened the glove compartment, half expecting to find something forgotten. An old receipt, a broken pen, a candy wrapper. Instead, there was an envelope I didn't remember leaving. Blank sealed. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single index card. My handwriting from another time. I recognized it instantly. Kandahar, midwinter, bored, homesick, slightly drunk on cough syrup. I'd written mantras to myself on cards like this, folded them into books, shoved them in corners. This one read, "You don't have to be her to stop becoming her." I stared at it, then laughed just once. A soft, surprised sound. My younger self had known something I was just now catching up to. That's the thing about slow damage, it's quiet. It's in the way your back tenses when the phone rings. In the way you edit yourself before saying, "I love you" to anyone. In the way you flinch at kindness because you're sure there's a catch. But it's also in the moments where you choose not to respond, not to fix, not to fold yourself again. I put the card back in the envelope and slid it into the glove box. When I finally started the car, the radio came on by accident, a low hum of static and piano. I didn't turn it off. Driving home, the world looked a little different. Not brighter, not better, just mine. The steering wheel fit cleanly in my hands. My name didn't belong to anyone else anymore. No mother to explain it. No shared deed to tether it. Just Claire Harrow as I'd chosen her. No saints, no villains, just a woman who stopped waiting for permission. I stood in front of the mirror the morning the paperwork came back. The name change had gone through. Official. Certified. Signed in blue ink by someone who'd never met me, but had the authority to say this is who you are now. Claire Harrow. It wasn't just new, it was chosen. Not a name inherited or married or handed down like some dusty coat. I had filed for it myself. Paid the fee. Waited the weeks. Walked the papers down to the courthouse and spelled each letter slowly as if I were carving them into stone. Harrow. I liked the sound of it. Sharp, clean, a little strange in the mouth. Not sweet, not soft, but deliberate. A harrow is a blade dragged across the earth to break it open so new things can grow. I read that somewhere. The image stuck with me. I stood in my apartment, waist up in the mirror, already half-buttoned into my uniform. The formal one. Navy coat, gold trim. The medals lay on the dresser beside me, their colored ribbons catching the morning light in thin flashes. I pinned them on slowly, methodically. The way you lace up boots you trust with your life. This uniform had been mine for years. But today, it felt different. Not heavier, just more honest. I buttoned the last fastener, smoothed my collar, and tightened the black tie with both hands. No one would see me today. There wasn't a ceremony. No one to impress. I wasn't reporting for duty or giving a speech. I had nowhere to be except here, present whole, finished in a way that had nothing to do with the military and everything to do with finally being out from under the weight of someone else's version of me. I didn't light the candle. I didn't need to. The silence in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like water settling after a long storm. I looked out the window. Bright blue sky clouds drifting slowly like they didn't have anywhere better to be. Across the street, someone's American flag moved in the wind steadily without panic. I turned back to the mirror. Stoic. That's what they used to call me. In the field, in the office, among friends who never really knew what that silence was holding back. But I wasn't hiding anymore. This wasn't armor. This was skin. I leaned in, slightly studying my face, not for flaws or lines, but for something quieter. Recognition. It was there now, finally. I saw myself and didn't flinch. No mother's judgment in the corners of my mouth. No echo of her voice in my spine. Just me. Claire. A name that wasn't a compromise. I whispered it once, Claire Harrow. It filled the space just enough. Then I said it again, louder. Not a declaration, just confirmation. No one clapped. No one gasped. The silence stayed, but it didn't press against me anymore. It held me. I picked up the last piece from the dresser, a single ribbon, not military. Blue and white, something my father once mailed in a small envelope during one of his sober years. For when you need to remember who you aren't, he'd written. I never wore it. Today, I slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat. Not to honor him, not to forgive. Just to acknowledge I came from somewhere and chose not to stay. I left the apartment and stood on the front steps for a long time, the sun warming the shoulders of my uniform, my fingers brushing the edge of the brass buttons like they could steady something inside me. The world didn't shift, but I had, and that was enough.